There is a brutal truth about economics that most people never hear. The more powerful the planner becomes, the less knowledge he actually possesses. At first glance, this sounds absurd. Governments employ thousands of economists, statisticians, and analysts. They collect mountains of data, employment figures, inflation indexes, production numbers, consumption reports. Entire ministries exist to study the economy. Yet despite this massive machinery of information, centrally planned systems have historically struggled to answer one simple question: what should be produced, in what quantity, and at what cost? This puzzle is known as the economic calculation problem. It was first articulated in the early 20th century by economists who noticed something profoundly unsettling about central planning. In a market economy, prices emerge from countless voluntary exchanges between buyers and sellers. Each price is a signal. It contains compressed information about scarcity, demand, opportunity cost, and risk. No single person creates these signals. They arise organically from millions of decisions made by individuals pursuing their own interests. Now imagine removing that process entirely. Suppose a central authority attempts to run the entire economy. Instead of markets deciding prices, a committee sets them. Instead of entrepreneurs deciding what to produce, bureaucrats allocate resources. Instead of competition testing ideas, directives guide production. At first, the system may appear efficient. Factories receive orders. Workers follow instructions. Output can even increase temporarily. But beneath the surface, something essential disappears. The feedback mechanism that tells producers whether their decisions actually make sense in markets. Mistakes are punished quickly. A company that wastes resources suffers losses. A firm that produces something people do not want disappears. Profit and loss act like a compass, guiding economic activity toward efficiency. Without those signals, decision makers are navigating in the dark. This is where the calculation problem emerges. A planner may know that steel, copper, and labor exist, but he cannot know the best way to allocate them without price signals generated by real exchange. Should steel go to bridges, cars, or railways? Should copper be used for electrical grids, telecommunications, or consumer electronics? Every choice carries an unseen cost. The opportunities sacrificed elsewhere. Markets reveal those costs automatically. Prices rise when something becomes scarce and fall when supply expands. Entrepreneurs respond to these movements constantly. They shift capital, innovate, and reallocate resources in response to signals that no central authority could ever fully replicate. Consider something as simple as a loaf of bread. To produce it requires farmers, fertilizer manufacturers, truck drivers, mill operators, bakers, and retailers. Each participant responds to price incentives. Wheat farmers decide how much to plant based on expected prices. Millers adjust production depending on demand for flour. Bakers change output based on consumer purchases. No one coordinates this entire process from the top. Yet bread appears daily on supermarket shelves. The miracle is not the bread itself. The miracle is the coordination of millions of independent decisions without a central command. Prices carry information from one part of the system to another. A drought raises wheat prices, which tells farmers to plant more next season. A drop in demand for bread lowers prices, signaling bakeries to reduce production. This decentralized intelligence is the heart of the market. System.central planning attempts to replace it with administrative decisions. But no planner, no matter how intelligent, can replicate the vast network of local knowledge embedded within market prices. The baker knows something the minister does not. The farmer knows something the statistician cannot measure. The truck driver understands logistical constraints that never appear in economic reports. Each of these fragments of knowledge matters. When markets operate freely, these fragments combine through price signals into a coherent structure. When central planning overrides prices, those signals disappear. The economy begins to lose its internal map. At that moment, planning becomes guesswork, and history shows what usually follows. Shortages of some goods, surpluses of others, factories producing items nobody wants while essential products vanish from shelves. The problem is not a lack of intelligence among planners. It is the impossibility of gathering and processing the dispersed knowledge that only markets can reveal. The economic calculation problem is therefore not merely a theoretical debate, it is a fundamental limitation on centralized control. It explains why economies guided by prices tend to adapt, innovate, and correct themselves over time, while economies guided by commands struggle to allocate resources efficiently. Markets are not perfect. They produce bubbles, crashes, and inequality, but they possess one extraordinary advantage. They continuously process information through the language of prices. Central planning, by contrast, attempts to silence that language, and when the signals disappear, so does the ability to calculate the true cost of economic decisions. The most dangerous illusion in economics is the belief that complexity can be controlled from the center. On paper, central planning appears rational. Experts analyze production targets, set quotas, allocate resources, and guide the economy toward predetermined goals. The system promises stability, fairness, and efficiency. But beneath this promise lies a psychological trap. The assumption that knowledge can be centralized. In reality, economic knowledge is scattered across society in ways that no institution can fully capture. It exists in the mind of the shop owner, who notices customers suddenly preferring a different product. It exists in the engineer experimenting with a new material. It exists in the logistics manager, who discovers a faster shipping route. These small pieces of information rarely appear in official statistics, yet collectively they determine how resources should be used. Markets function as a discovery process that gathers these fragments. Every transaction reveals a preference. Every price movement reflects new information. When demand increases, prices rise. When supply expands, prices fall. Entrepreneurs respond to these signals, adjusting production without needing instructions from a central authority. Central planning interrupts this discovery process. Without market prices generated through voluntary exchange, planners lose the ability to compare alternatives meaningfully. Imagine trying to build a city without knowing the relative value of steel, concrete, labor, and land. Decisions become arbitrary. Planners may choose projects that appear impressive on paper, but waste enormous resources in practice. History provides countless examples of this phenomenon. In the Soviet Union, factories were often evaluated based on meeting production quotas rather than satisfying consumer demand. If a nail factory was ordered to produce nails by weight, it might produce a small number of enormous nails to meet the quota efficiently. If the quota was based on quantity, the factory might produce millions of tiny nails that were practically useless. The planners achieved their statistical targets, but the outcome failed the real test of economic value. This disconnect reveals the core problem. Numbers are not the same as knowledge. Central planners rely heavily on aggregated data, but data arrives late and lacks context. By the time production statistics reach a ministry, consumer preferences may have already shifted. Meanwhile, the local knowledge required to respond quickly remains trapped within individual businesses and workers who no longer have the freedom to act on it. Markets thrive precisely because they allow decentralized entrepreneurs experiment constantly. Some ideas fail and disappear. Others succeed and spread rapidly through competition. The system evolves through trial and error. Central planning attempts to eliminate this uncertainty, but in doing so, it removes the mechanism that generates progress. Innovation rarely emerges from rigid structures. It emerges from individuals willing to take risks, guided by the possibility of profit and disciplined by the threat of loss. These incentives encourage creativity, efficiency, and adaptation. When they disappear, economic activity becomes mechanical rather than dynamic. The psychological dimension is equally important. In a market economy, decision-makers bear the consequences of their choices. If a business misallocates resources, it suffers losses. This creates a powerful feedback loop that forces learning and improvement. In centrally planned systems, accountability becomes blurred. A failed decision can be blamed on inaccurate reports, unrealistic targets, or external conditions. Responsibility disperses across layers of bureaucracy. Without clear feedback, mistakes persist far longer than they would in competitive markets. Over time, the entire system begins to drift away from reality. Factories continue producing goods regardless of whether people want them. Shortages emerge in unexpected places. Consumers spend hours searching for basic items that should be abundant. Meanwhile, warehouses fill with products that nobody needs. This pattern is not accidental. It is the predictable consequence of suppressing the price mechanism that coordinates economic activity. Markets may appear chaotic, but their chaos contains order. Each price is a message transmitted through the economy. Each profit signal rewards efficiency. Each loss exposes waste. Central planning replaces these signals with commands. But commands cannot replicate the intelligence embedded within voluntary exchange. The result is an economy that looks organized from above, yet becomes increasingly disorganized below the surface. Resources drift toward politically favored projects rather than economically valuable ones. Innovation slows. Productivity stagnates. The system becomes rigid in a world that demands constant adaptation. The economic calculation problem, therefore, reveals something deeper than a technical flaw. It exposes the limits of centralized knowledge itself. No committee, no ministry, and no algorithm can fully replace the decentralized information network created by free markets. Prices are not merely numbers. They are the language through which an entire economy communicates. Understanding the economic calculation problem changes the way we see markets. What appears chaotic at first glance is actually an extraordinary system of coordination. Billions of people pursue their own goals, yet their actions become aligned through the quiet guidance of price signals. No central authority instructs them. No grand blueprint dictates the outcome, and still, the system adapts continuously. This adaptive quality is what gives markets their resilience. When conditions change, prices change with them. A sudden shortage of oil raises energy prices, encouraging conservation and alternative production. A technological breakthrough lowers costs, spreading benefits across industries and consumers. Entrepreneurs observe these signals and redirect capital toward opportunities that did not exist before. Central planning struggles to replicate this responsiveness. Because decisions must pass through layers of administration, adjustments occur slowly. By the time planners recognize a problem, the underlying conditions may have already shifted again. The economy becomes trapped in a cycle of delayed reactions and unintended consequences. This difference becomes most visible during periods of rapid change. Consider technological revolutions. The rise of personal computing, the internet, and digital communication reshaped entire industries within a few decades. Thousands of companies experimented with new ideas. Many failed. A few succeeded spectacularly. Through this process, markets discovered efficient ways to allocate capital, talent, and resources toward emerging technologies. A centrally planned system would have struggled to anticipate these developments. Innovation rarely follows predictable schedules. It emerges from unexpected combinations of ideas, experiments, and entrepreneurial insight. Markets allow these experiments to occur simultaneously across thousands of firms. Central planning must choose in advance which experiments deserve resources, and that choice is almost always incomplete. The deeper lesson is that markets are not simply mechanisms for trade. They are systems for learning. Each transaction reveals information about what people value, what resources are scarce, and what innovations deserve investment. Prices adjust constantly, incorporating new knowledge from millions of participants. In this sense, the market behaves like a vast decentralized intelligence. Every buyer contributes a signal. Every seller responds. Every entrepreneur interprets the shifting landscape of incentives and opportunities. Through this continuous interaction, resources flow toward their most valued uses without requiring a central coordinator. Critics often point to market failures as evidence that planning could perform better. Markets can indeed produce bubbles, mispricing, and inequality. But these failures occur within a system that still processes information more effectively than any known alternative. Even during crises, price signals play a crucial role. When demand surges for certain goods, rising prices encourage producers to increase supply. When industries decline, falling prices signal that resources should move elsewhere. The adjustment may be painful, but it allows the economy to correct itself over time. Central planning attempts to avoid these disruptions by controlling outcomes directly. Yet without accurate price signals, the system loses the ability to distinguish productive activity from wasteful activity. Projects may continue consuming resources long after they should have been abandoned. The calculation problem returns again and again. Not because planners lack intelligence, but because the information required for rational allocation does not exist in a centralized form. It emerges only through the interactions of millions of individuals participating in markets. This insight leads to a powerful conclusion. Economic freedom is not merely a political ideal. It is a practical necessity for coordinating complex societies. When individuals are allowed to make decisions based on local knowledge and price signals, the economy becomes capable of adapting to change, discovering new opportunities, and correcting its own errors. Markets do not eliminate uncertainty, but they transform uncertainty into a process of exploration. Each profit opportunity invites innovation. Each loss eliminates inefficiency. Over time, the system evolves through countless adjustments that no planner could ever fully design. The economic calculation problem, therefore, stands as one of the most important insights in modern economic thought. It explains why decentralized markets consistently outperform centralized planning in allocating resources across complex economies. Prices carry knowledge that cannot be gathered in any other way. They translate millions of individual decisions into signals that guide production, investment, and innovation. Remove those signals and the economy loses its compass. Allow them to operate freely, and society gains something remarkable. A self-organizing system capable of coordinating human activity on a scale that no central authority could ever achieve.